I'd been praying and felt like God told me He would give me 3 things, but they didn't seem to be happening. I'd waited for years, yet nothing. In fact, my hopes seemed to be dwindling by the day. To me, it felt like God just didn't care anymore. Was He oblivious to my needs and desires? If anything, it felt like He was determined to kick me down one flight of stairs after another until I reached a point of complete and utter hopelessness. It was one humbling after another. Hadn't I reached the bottom of the staircase yet? Enough was enough. Eventually, I began to doubt that I had heard God correctly. Maybe those 3 things I felt He had promised were simply my imagination. What if it was me who had fantasized that He had promised them? What if there really was no hope for any of them becoming a reality? If that was true, then a slew of choices I'd made in the last couple of years were completely off base. And yes, perhaps all of this was a punishment for wrong choices. As my friend Lisa Ray Preston says, you're in a bad spot when you're doubting that you really heard from God. It's true. When you feel like everything you've been directed to do was just your own imagination, what hope do you have anymore? Finally, I decided to throw out a fleece. I requested for something to happen on a specific day and prayed, if you were really the one who promised me these 3 things, then let this thing happen on this day. If it was just my imagination, then don't have it happen. My request wasn't difficult. It was something He'd done before many times, but not recently. You know what? It didn't happen. Didn't even begin to happen. Zilch. Nada. What did His silence mean? My mind began twirling. Did God promise to give me one of my requests, but not all 3? Had I imagined His voice? Had all of my major decisions over the last 18 months resulted from following my own imagination? Did God care about me? Maybe He really didn't care in the least. Did He even exist? I felt my mind swirling down a toilet. I couldn't seem to stop the descent. No matter how hard I tried to hang on to hope, that life raft seemed to twirl right along with me down the drain. I was just about ready to throw God and everything I believed out the window. The resounding answer to my question seemed to be, no, I didn't tell you those things were going to happen. I didn't originate or promise you any of that. It was all your imagination. For a few minutes, I entertained the possibility. What if all those conversations with God had been my own fantasies? What if all the choices I had made were not what God told me to do at all? They were all my ideas, and I'd convinced myself that God was on board with them. It was a beautiful morning, so I decided to go for a walk in my field. I walked until I reached the creek and then sat down and started to speak aloud the hopeless thoughts of my heart. Am I the only person who's gotten to the rant point with God? I know that's asking for a lightning bolt, but I was fine with that possibility. Put me out of my misery. Be done with it. It wasn't long before I knew the rant wasn't going to take me anywhere productive, whether there was a God to hear me or not. So I stopped, and the thought occurred to me that I could do what I'd done dozens of times while out walking in nature. I could create something different, whatever I wanted. I'd created freedom for myself in that field and created lots of dreams that began to manifest. That much I knew. I began verbalizing aloud how I wanted my life to look. I described it in detail. In only a few moments, I felt a shift, a feeling of peace, of hope, of possibilities. I got excited about what I wanted and kept verbalizing. I then changed my phrasing from I want to I choose. I began describing what I choose to do with my property, the people who would come here, the man who would be my future husband, and how we would interact. I described my financial situation in detail and what kind of work we would do together. Yeah, now this was fun. This was the vision I'd had for myself for some time. The darkness began to lift from my soul, and it was as if I could suddenly see clearly. With the clarity came an understanding that God did not tell me I'd magically get those 3 things. They were not ideas or choices that He originated. I originated them. I chose those dreams, and God simply said, I like it. Go for it. That feeling of hope, light, possibilities, and peace were Him saying, I love this idea. Let's create it. The reason the fleece experiment resulted in a God never promised this answer is because he didn't promise it. I came to him choosing what I wanted, and he said, I like it. Go for it. I'll support you in that. With that choice, spiritual creation began on an unseen level and started to move into physical form. But the moment I let fear take over, the moment I began doubting it was possible, the creation process ceased and eventually began to reverse as I kept entertaining negative thoughts. God did not initiate or stop the creative process. I did. I'd been blaming God for promising something and not delivering. I'd been acting like it was him who didn't care about me, who seemed bent on making me suffer. Like a 2-year-old, I'd been throwing a temper tantrum, blaming God for the fact that I'd tossed my ice cream cone on the ground. God wasn't punishing me. I'm the one who had stopped believing in myself. I'm the one who stopped believing my dreams were possible. That's when the creative process stopped.